The geopolitical landscape is currently vibrating with a frequency that suggests we are on the precipice of a seismic shift in global power dynamics, specifically regarding the intensifying standoff between Washington and Tehran. The air in the capital is thick with the scent of an impending storm as the administration pivots from diplomatic posturing to a more muscular, definitive stance that many observers believe could define the legacy of the current presidency. We are witnessing a calculated escalation, a chess match played with the highest possible stakes where the move sets are no longer confined to the quiet halls of international summits, but are being projected through the deployment of massive military assets. The president has signaled that the window for negotiation is not merely closing, it is being slammed shut by the weight of American strategic interests. This is a moment of profound consequence where the line between a historic diplomatic breakthrough and a catastrophic regional conflagration has never been thinner. The rhetoric emanating from the Oval Office has taken on a sharp, uncompromising edge, reflecting a belief that the previous decades of engagement have yielded little more than a fortified and emboldened adversary. Today, the message sent to the Iranian leadership was devoid of the usual diplomatic ambiguities, replaced instead by a stark warning of extreme trauma should a comprehensive nuclear deal remain elusive. The gravity of this moment cannot be overstated. We are looking at a scenario where the administration is betting everything on the collapse of Iranian resolve under the shadow of overwhelming force. The strategic calculus here is rooted in a belief that the Iranian regime, despite its outward display of defiance, is fundamentally brittle. Internal pressures fueled by decades of economic isolation and arrest of population have created a domestic environment that is increasingly difficult for the clerical leadership to manage. The administration's gamble is that by increasing the external pressure to an unprecedented level, the internal fault lines will finally give way. However, this strategy carries with it a terrifying set of risks. If the regime in Tehran chooses to double down rather than capitulate, the resulting vacuum of power or the eruption of open conflict could destabilize the entire Middle East in ways that are difficult to predict. We are talking about a region already scarred by conflict, where a single miscalculation could ignite a chain reaction that draws in global powers and reshapes the energy markets of the world. The question being whispered in the corridors of power is no longer just about the terms of a potential deal, but about what happens the day after the regime's current structure is dismantled. The historical parallels being drawn are as numerous as they are debated. Some look back to the early 2000s, specifically the disarmament of the Libyan regime under Muammar Gaddafi, as a potential blueprint for what success might look like. In that instance, the specter of a successful invasion in a neighboring country was enough to convince a long-standing dictator to hand over his weapons of mass destruction in exchange for a temporary reprieve from Western pressure. The administration seems to be leaning into this precedent, hoping that the sight of the USS Gerald R moving into position, a carrier strike group representing more raw firepower than has been assembled in the region since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, will provide the necessary incentive for Tehran to reconsider its trajectory. This is a display of hard power in its most literal sense. The deployment is a physical manifestation of the warning that the American military possesses the capability to reach any target and execute any mission with surgical precision. It is a psychological operation as much as it is a tactical one, designed to convince the Iranian leadership that their survival is contingent upon a total and humiliating retreat from their nuclear and regional ambitions. Yet there is a deep-seated anxiety regarding the discombobulation of the Iranian state. While the administration speaks of bringing help to the Iranian people and ending 50 years of what they describe as fanatical dictatorship, the practicalities of such a transition are fraught with peril. The memory of the power vacuums left behind in the wake of previous interventions remains fresh. There is a legitimate concern that removing the current lid on the Iranian political system could unleash forces that are even more radical or chaotic than the current status quo. Critics of the current approach argue that the president is risking a spectacular failure, one that could see the United States dragged into another endless conflict without a clear exit strategy. They point to the streets of Tehran and other major cities where tens of thousands have allegedly been suppressed, suggesting that while the desire for change is real, the path to a stable, pro-Western democracy is paved with obstacles that cannot be cleared by carrier groups and stealth bombers alone. As the clock ticks down on the president's self-imposed one-month deadline, the international community is watching with bated breath. The tension is palpable not just in the Middle East, but in every financial hub and diplomatic mission across the globe. We are in the 1 or 2 weeks window where the naval assets reach their stations, and the strategic silence of the Iranian leadership becomes increasingly ominous. Every statement, every troop movement, and every leaked intelligence report is being scrutinized for signs of the regime's next move. Will they seek a back channel for a face-saving exit, or will they prepare for a confrontation that could redefine the 21st century? The administration's stance is clear: total capitulation on missiles, an end to the support of proxy groups, a cessation of internal crackdowns, and the complete obliteration of the nuclear program. Anything less, they suggest, will be met with a response that history will record as either the ultimate masterstroke of a decisive leader or the most significant gamble in American foreign policy history. While the world's eyes are fixed on the potential for kinetic warfare in the Persian Gulf, a different kind of conflict is ravaging the domestic landscape of the American elite. The blast radius of the unsealed Jeffrey Epstein files continues to expand, claiming high-profile casualties with a ruthless efficiency that has left the legal and financial sectors reeling. This isn't just a story of individual scandal. It is an expose of a deeply interconnected web of influence, where professional boundaries were blurred and moral compasses were seemingly discarded in the pursuit of access and prestige. The recent resignation of a top-tier counsel at Goldman Sachs, a woman with an impeccable pedigree, including a stint as deputy White House counsel, has sent shockwaves through the establishment. It serves as a stark reminder that the fallout from the Epstein documents is gender-blind and indifferent to professional standing. The disclosure of emails showing a chummy relationship with the disgraced financier, including references to him as Uncle Jeffrey, has shattered the carefully constructed veneer of many who believed their associations were buried in the past. This domestic storm is inextricably linked to the broader narrative of institutional integrity. As the public watches the government prepare for potential war abroad, they are simultaneously witnessing a collapse of trust in the figures who have long occupied the highest levels of the legal and financial architecture. The revelation that highly accomplished lawyers, individuals tasked with upholding the law at its most sensitive levels, were allegedly providing spin and strategic advice to a convicted felon is a bitter pill for many to swallow. It raises fundamental questions about the instincts of those in power and the ease with which elite circles can be infiltrated by those seeking to buy legitimacy. The guilt by association that is now haunting both sides of the political aisle suggests that this is not a partisan issue, but a systemic one. The casualty list is growing, and there is a sense that we are only at the beginning of a long and painful reckoning. The emails described by those who have seen them as horrible and indefensible are acting as a digital trail that no amount of legal maneuvering can fully erase. The intersection of these two massive stories, the potential for war with Iran and the unraveling of the Epstein network, paints a picture of a world in profound transition. On one hand, we see the projection of state power on the global stage, an attempt to reassert dominance through military and diplomatic pressure. On the other, we see the internal decay of the very structures that are supposed to guide that power. The contrast is jarring. As the Ford-class carrier moves toward the Strait of Hormuz, the digital archives of a dead financier are dismantling the careers of those who thought they were untouchable. Both narratives are driven by the same underlying themes: the use and abuse of power, the consequences of long-held secrets coming to light, and the unpredictable nature of high-stakes gambles. Whether it is a president drawing red lines in the sand or a lawyer trying to manage the fallout of a toxic association, the theme of accountability is the central thread. The next few weeks will be among the most critical in recent memory. The convergence of these events suggests that the old rules of engagement, both in international relations and in the private corridors of the elite, are being rewritten in real time. The administration is pushing for a bad day for Iran to ensure a better future for the region, while the legal community is bracing for more bad days as the truth of the Epstein files continues to leak out. There is no manual for navigating the confluence of a potential nuclear standoff and a systemic collapse of elite credibility. Every decision made in the coming days will be etched into the historical record, scrutinized for generations to come as a testament to the character and foresight of those currently at the helm. The stakes are absolute, the tension is reaching a breaking point, and the world is simply trying to keep up with the pace of the unfolding drama. This is the reality of the current moment, a world on edge, watching as the giants of the geopolitical and financial worlds face their most significant tests yet. The discombobulation isn't just a threat leveled at a foreign adversary. It's a state of being for an establishment suddenly forced to confront the ghosts of its own making. As the military assets settle into their stations and the legal teams scramble to contain the damage of the next batch of unsealed documents, One thing is certain: the status quo is a relic of the past, and whatever emerges from this period of intense friction will be fundamentally different from what came before. As the naval deployment reaches its final positioning in the Gulf, the psychological weight of the carrier strike group begins to manifest in the shifting rhetoric of the regional power players. This is no longer a theoretical exercise in deterrence, but a kinetic reality that necessitates a definitive response from the clerical leadership in Tehran. The strategic architecture of the Middle East is being recalibrated in real time as the world watches the silent movement of the USS Gerald R, a vessel that serves as a floating sovereign territory of the United States, capable of projecting power that dwarfs the collective air forces of most sovereign nations. The internal deliberations within the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the supreme leadership are undoubtedly fraught with a tension that has not been felt since the darkest days of the 1980s. They are facing an adversary that has explicitly linked their economic survival and their very hold on power to a total abandonment of their strategic crown jewels. The demand for an absolute cessation of the nuclear program, coupled with the dismantling of their regional proxy networks, represents an existential ultimatum. To comply is to admit the failure of the revolutionary project. To resist is to court a level of discombobulation that could lead to the total erasure of the state's command and control infrastructure. The administration's strategy hinges on the belief that the Iranian regime is currently suffering from a profound internal exhaustion. The reports of 35,000 to 45,000 citizens being suppressed in the streets are not just statistics. They are symptoms of a systemic failure that the White House believes can be exploited. By layering a massive military threat over a collapsing domestic economy, the goal is to trigger a cascade of failures within the Iranian security apparatus. The hope is that the mid-level commanders, seeing the overwhelming force gathered on their doorstep and the dissatisfaction of their own people, will choose preservation over a suicidal defense of a failing ideology. This is the extreme trauma the president referenced, not just the physical impact of munitions, but the psychological collapse of a regime's will to govern. However, history warns that a cornered regime often becomes its most dangerous. If the leadership in Tehran perceives that their end is inevitable regardless of their actions, the incentive to lash out and burn the house down with them becomes a terrifyingly rational choice. This is the narrow corridor through which American policy must now pass, applying enough pressure to force a capitulation without triggering a scorched earth retaliation that could ignite the entire global energy corridor. While the naval assets settle into their stations, the focus in the West remains split between the potential for a hot war and the cold, hard revelations continuing to spill out of the unsealed Epstein documents. The resignation of Catherine Remler from Goldman Sachs is being treated by many insiders as a canary in the coal mine for the legal profession. This was not a peripheral figure. This was a woman who occupied the inner sanctum of the Obama administration's legal team, a partner at one of the world's most prestigious law firms, and a titan of the white-collar defense world. Her fall from grace highlights a recurring theme in the Epstein files: the way in which the financier utilized his wealth to buy a layer of professional protection that functioned as a legal and social firewall. The emails revealing her chummy interactions and her role in providing spin advice to Epstein during his most vulnerable legal periods in 2018 and 2019 suggest a level of proximity that is fundamentally incompatible with the ethical standards of her office. It paints a picture of an elite legal culture that viewed Epstein not as a pariah, but as a high-value node in a network of influence and referral. The blast radius is widening because the files are revealing a systemic failure of instincts among those who are paid specifically for their judgment. The defense that these were merely professional relationships is beginning to crumble under the weight of the recorded correspondence. When a top-tier lawyer, someone who has served as the deputy White House counsel, is seen calling a convicted sex offender Uncle Jeffrey or accepting gifts and high-value clients from him, the professional veneer is stripped away to reveal a culture of complicity. This is the casualty count that the political and financial establishment feared. It isn't just about the men who may have participated in Epstein's illicit activities. It is about the women and men who facilitated his continued presence in polite society long after his crimes were public knowledge. The resignation at Goldman Sachs is likely the first of many, as the guilt by association begins to function as a social and professional contagion. The emails are being described as a roadmap of the elite's ethical bankruptcy, showing a world where the pursuit of the next big client or the next prestigious appointment outweighed any concern for the character of the man providing the introductions. The timing of these two crises, the Iranian standoff and the Epstein fallout, creates a surreal atmosphere in the halls of power. On one screen, you have the high-definition feeds of carrier decks and fighter jets preparing for a potential strike on a sovereign nation. On the other, you have the slow, agonizing drip of unsealed court documents that are dismantling the reputations of the very people who often advise on such military actions. There is a sense of a double-front war, a physical one abroad and a moral one at home. The administration is signaling that it has the stomach for both. By moving the Ford-class carrier into position, the president is demonstrating a willingness to use the ultimate tools of the state to enforce his will. Simultaneously, the refusal of the Department of Justice to intervene or shield those named in the Epstein files suggests a tactical decision to let the blast radius consume those who are found wanting. The discombobulated state mentioned in relation to Venezuela is now being applied as a metaphorical threat to any entity, foreign or domestic, that stands in the way of the administration's vision of a purged and restructured world order. This period of 1 or 2 weeks is critical for the administration's messaging. They are using the military buildup at Fort Bragg and the deployment to the Middle East as a backdrop to a broader narrative of restoration. The message is that the era of backing down is over, whether it's in the face of Iranian nuclear ambitions or the corrupt networks of the domestic elite. The president's remark that it is time for new leadership in Iran is a clear signal of intent for regime change, even if the official policy remains focused on a deal. The military is being used as a blunt instrument of diplomacy, with the threat of extreme trauma serving as the primary negotiation tactic. In this context, the Epstein files serve as a convenient, if chaotic, distraction that keeps the domestic opposition off balance. Every high-profile resignation from the left, right, and center reduces the number of voices capable of mounting a coherent challenge to the administration's foreign policy gambles. As we look toward the next phase of this escalation, the question remains, what does a bad day for Iran actually look like in the 21st century? Is it a series of surgical strikes on nuclear facilities, or is it a total cyberkinetic dismantling of their society? The reports from Venezuela regarding those subject to the discombobulated suggest a form of warfare that goes beyond traditional bombing runs. It implies a systematic disruption of everything from the electrical grid to the financial systems, leaving a nation unable to function as a coherent entity. If this is the blueprint for Iran, then the extreme trauma promised by the president is not an exaggeration. It is a promise of a total structural collapse. Meanwhile, the domestic discombobulation continues as the legal and financial giants of the world look over their shoulders, wondering whose name will appear in the next batch of emails. The fallout from the Epstein files is proving that in the digital age, there is no such thing as a former association. Everything is archived, everything is retrievable, and in the current climate, everything is a potential career ender. The intersection of these stories is the defining feature of our time. A world where the traditional borders of conflict have vanished and the battlefields are everywhere from the Strait of Hormuz to the private servers of a disgraced financier. The tension surrounding the Iranian nuclear standoff has now entered a phase of agonizing anticipation, where the silence from Tehran is being interpreted by many in the West as the quiet before a profound structural collapse. At the center of this geopolitical theater is the USS Gerald R. Ford, which has now officially arrived on station, its massive silhouette serving as a 100,000-ton reminder that the era of strategic patience has been replaced by a doctrine of overwhelming kinetic potential. For the Iranian leadership, the 1 or 2 weeks window has narrowed to a matter of days, and the extreme trauma promised by the president is no longer a rhetorical flourishes, but a technical reality. Intelligence reports suggest that the Iranian military command is currently paralyzed by internal debate over the Gaddafi Option, the total, abject capitulation of their nuclear and missile programs in exchange for the regime's survival. The precedent of 2003, where the fall of Baghdad prompted the Libyan dictator to surrender his weapons of mass destruction, looms large over the current deliberations in the Iranian capital. The administration's gamble is that the Iranian elite, seeing the sheer scale of the firepower assembled against them, will choose the humiliation of disarmament over the certainty of an obliterated state. However, the discombobulation mentioned in relation to recent events in Venezuela suggests that the American strategy involves more than just traditional airstrikes. There are whispers of a multi-domain offensive that would target the very nervous system of the Iranian state, its digital infrastructure, its financial clearinghouses, and its internal security communications. This is the modern face of extreme trauma, a nation-state rendered blind, deaf, and mute in the span of a few hours. The president's visit to Fort Bragg was a deliberate signal that the American military is prepared to go anywhere and get anything done, implying that the surgical removal of the regime's leadership is on the table if they do not drop the dime on their terror proxies and nuclear ambitions. This isn't just about a deal anymore. It's about a fundamental restructuring of the Middle Eastern power balance. The administration is betting that the Iranian people, having already suffered under the weight of a fanatical dictatorship for nearly 50 years, will see the collapse of the regime not as a catastrophe, but as a liberation. It is a high-stakes vision of a new leadership that would integrate Iran back into the global community, provided they first undergo a total and verifiable disarmament. While the geopolitical world braces for a potential explosion in the Persian Gulf, the domestic blast radius of the Epstein files is leveling the playing field of the American elite with a similar, if less kinetic, intensity. The resignation of Catherine Remler from her high-ranking post at Goldman Sachs is being analyzed as a watershed moment for the guilt by association era. As a former deputy White House counsel and a powerhouse in the white-collar criminal defense world, her downfall represents the collapse of one of the legal community's most fortified reputations. The emails that led to her departure, where she allegedly provided spin advice to Jeffrey Epstein as late as 2018 and 2019, have exposed a deeper truth about the nature of elite power. It is often maintained through a series of chummy relationships that bypass traditional ethical boundaries. The revelation that she referred to the disgraced financier as Uncle Jeffrey, while simultaneously holding some of the most sensitive legal roles in the country, has left both the public and the professional establishment in a state of shock. It suggests that Epstein was not just a social climber, but a strategic asset for those seeking to expand their client base and influence. The fallout is proving to be gender blind, a detail that has caught many off guard. The initial assumption that the Epstein files would primarily claim male casualties, those who participated in his illicit activities, has been proven wrong. The casualties now include high-achieving women like Rumler, whose professional instincts failed them when it came to the lure of Epstein's network. This is the systemic decay that the expose is highlighting, a world where bad instincts are rewarded with high-value clients and prestigious partnerships until the digital trail finally catches up. The emails, which are being released left, right, and center, are acting as a corrosive agent on the credibility of the entire legal and financial architecture. There is a sense of another one bites the dust every time a new document is unsealed, and the question is no longer who is involved, but who isn't. The administration's hands-off approach to the release of these files suggests they are comfortable letting the horrible reality of these associations play out in the court of public opinion, effectively discombobulating their domestic critics while they focus on the Iranian threat. The intersection of these two narratives, the external threat of a nuclear Iran and the internal rot of the Epstein files, paints a picture of a world undergoing a forced purification. The red lines being drawn by the president are not just for Tehran, they are for the domestic elite who have operated with a sense of impunity for decades. Whether it is a rogue state seeking nuclear weapons or a financier buying his way into the White House counsel's office, the administration is signaling that the old ways of doing business are over. The deployment of the Ford-class carrier and the release of the Epstein emails are two sides of the same coin, a projection of truth and power designed to break the back of those who would challenge the new order. The success the president speaks of regarding Iran is tied to the right thing he expects from those named in the files, a total and absolute reckoning with the consequences of their choices. As we move into the final stages of this standoff, the time frame is everything. The month or so given by the president is rapidly expiring, and the psychological pressure on the Iranian regime is at an all-time high. Every day that passes without a deal increases the likelihood of a bad day that history will never forget. Simultaneously, the legal teams at the world's largest banks and law firms are in a state of extreme trauma of their own as they wait for the next set of unsealed documents. The blast radius is no longer a metaphor. It is a lived reality for those who once thought they were the masters of the universe. The discombobulated state of the global elite and the Iranian leadership is the new status quo, and the world is watching to see who will be the next to walk that plank for the better interest of their respective institutions. The convergence of these events is creating a historical moment of unprecedented clarity, where the masks of power are being stripped away to reveal the raw, uncompromising mechanisms of control that define our age. The dual front crisis has reached its zenith, revealing an administration committed to power realignment through extreme trauma. In the Persian Gulf, a wall of American steel has effectively vacuum-sealed Iran, forcing the regime to choose between physical obliteration and the surrender of its revolutionary identity. This psychological siege isolates Tehran as the president's most important decision rejects managed decline in favor of radical geopolitical surgery. The message from Fort Bragg is clear. The window for a Gaddafi-style surrender is closing. If the deadline expires, the transition from psychological pressure to kinetic reality will be instantaneous, leaving the adversary in a permanently discombobulated state. Simultaneously, the Epstein files have breached the inner sanctums of global finance, proving that professional pedigree cannot shield the elite from a compromised moral compass. The resignation of Catherine Rummler signifies a reckoning for a culture that prioritized access over ethics. These horrible emails strip away professional nuance, revealing a narrative of complicity that damages the very institutions these figures once led. By refusing to offer a safe harbor, the administration aligns its foreign cleanup with a domestic purge of the old guard. We are witnessing a violent rebirth where red lines are absolute and emails are forever. The strategy is singular. Apply maximum pressure until structural failures become public. Whether via carrier groups or unsealed documents, the tools of change are deployed. The only remaining question is who will survive when the blast radius finally settles.